Hello friends, welcome to the EduSat Network. Our today's lecture will be a continuation from the last time where we talked about changing modes of worship in India. And today we will talk more in depth about this, and for this discussion we have this in the studio our subject expert Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. He has a teaching experience of nearly 2 decades, and with this brief introduction I'd like to welcome sir and also request him to begin our today's lecture. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you, Urvashi. Good morning, viewers. As we had initiated our discussion on this topic, changing modes of worship, in the last lecture, we had come up to the middle of the first millennium BC, which is also the period when we have in the form of Brahmanic literature, the Upanishads, and in terms of non-Brahmanical sources, we get to see Buddhism and Jainism related sources, which inform us about the changing modes of worship, changing religiosity at around this time. And we had discussed the last time around that it is not only limited to Buddhism and Jainism. Actually, there is a flurry of heterodox sects that we get to see around this time, and we had also tried to relate this phenomena of the emergence of the heterodox sects around 6th century BC in relation to the transformative aspects of this century itself. We had talked about the changes in the political sphere with the emergence of territorial states, big territorial states, and the monarchical system of polity becoming the triumphant mode of polity in comparison to several other modes of polity that were in existence around this time, like republican system, tribal confederacies, and so forth. Alongside that, we had also talked about the economic transformation in the sense that agriculture and intensive agriculture with the emergence of paddy cultivation on account of iron plowshare and clearing of forests and new fertile areas brought under the in the vortex of agriculture and so forth. We had also talked of the changes, transformative aspects of the social landscape, and of course the religious landscape is the centerpiece of our argument. Now, having had a brief kind of an idea about 6th century BC, what we find is that at the ideational level, or at the level of thoughts and ideas, some kind of an attempt seems to be made in Upanishads to accord some kind of continuity, which is in direct contrast to the kind of transformation that is happening in the real world. So here we find that those perennial aspects of continuity which would not change are getting reflected in Upanishads, and that's why the entire tone and tenor of Upanishad happens to be a little bit different from the usual account of the Vedas and Brahmanas and Aranyaks and so forth. It delves into Upanishads, delve into the realm of metaphysics, philosophy. It talks about soul, it talks about say Atma and Paramatma, and these are indestructible aspects that get highlighted, and this kind of a tinge that we get in Upanishads is understood by several scholars as some kind of a dream, some kind of an urge to maintain continuity in the face of drastic changes that had been happening around them. And therefore, we find such kinds of articulations being the central theme in Upanishads. So, quite a few things might change, society might change, economy might change, towns, villages might change into towns and so forth, but the life and the perennial aspect of say soul, indestructible soul, that persists, that cannot be destroyed, and that's how some kind of a solace was achieved, or at least sought to be achieved through such articulations in the Brahmanical sources in Upanishads. On the other hand, at a more real level, we find that the ideas enunciated by Buddha and Jain actually ran contrary to the Brahmanical notion of worship and religiosity. And it is also suggested by scholars that these ideas expounded by Buddha and Jain is also in tune with the changing times, and that kind of accounts for the popularity and the huge social base that it came to have during this period. In fact, it would be wrong to presume that around this time, around 6th century BC, Buddhism and Jainism emerged as a religion, because the formal aspect of religion is something that was concretized or that crystallized over several centuries subsequent to 6th century BC. At around this time, it would be better to understand it in the sense of a social movement. And as we all understand, a social movement comes to encompass the aspirations of several gamut of society, several sections of society, and it kind of symbolizes the collective aspiration of these sections. And that is why in Buddhism, we find that the change from rural to urban, which is depicted in Brahmanical sources, traditional Brahmanical sources, in a rather disparaging way, comes to get some kind of a tacit approval in Buddhist accounts and Jain accounts. Similarly, trade and commercial activity is also something which is not quite by the liking of the way in which Brahmanical sources talk about religiosity and so forth. So they are not presented in a very positive sense. For instance, money lending and so forth on interest, etc., is despised. Buddhism also doesn't say that one should lend money on interest, but the kind of distaste that Brahmanical sources displayed, that sense is somewhat missing from Buddhist accounts and Jain accounts. Similarly, the upcoming sections like the territorial monarchs, etc., for instance, Buddha is said to have had very good relationship with the upcoming territorial despotic monarchs like Bimbisar and Ajatashatru, although Buddha himself came from the lineage of Kshatriyas and confederacy kind of political structure, republican kind of political structure, and yet he had very good relationship with Bimbisar and Ajatashatru, who were the upcoming despotic monarchical territorial rulers. So what we find is that there is some kind of a synchronized articulation or philosophy so far as Buddhism and Jainism are concerned with respect to the changes that are happening around this time. And at this juncture, of course, we find that one segment of Brahmanical sources also responds in a way which is different from the usual Brahmanical accounts, while other religious urges or religious movements are to the contrary. that is, they are outside the pale of Brahmanism and somewhat opposed to it. So this kind of turmoil, this kind of transformation that we get to see in 6th century BC is something which makes this period extremely important so far as understanding the changing modes of worship is concerned, particularly in ancient India. Subsequent to this, what we find is that the trajectories of social, economic, political and religious changes that this century had come to symbolize went on concretizing themselves, and over a period of time it acquired a more mature, more stable, robust form. So what was incipient in 6th century BC actually came to acquire a very visible, solid form. For instance, in the case of political changes, we have already seen that the territorial states which are coming up actually found its pinnacle in the form of the emergence of Mauryan Empire, which was almost a pan-Indian empire, in the sense that apart from the peninsular India, that is Tamil Nadu and Kerala area, rest of the portions were all under the Mauryan Empire, in fact including several areas that are not part of present day India in the northwestern Indian subcontinental area. So similarly, in the domain of religion, we find that Buddhism and Jainism over a period of time came to acquire several institutions and several adherents, a set of laws, a set of rules, moral code of conduct, and all these gave a formal shape to Buddhism, which emerged as a kind of reaction to the Brahmanical orthodoxy around 6th century BC. And as any formal religion would have it, Buddhism also and Jainism too came to acquire several such features. And by the time we reach the post-Mauryan period, or the period around the turn of the Common Era, that is the time when we find that even these upcoming religions like Buddhism and Jainism, which symbolized the changing urges of 6th century BC, they somewhat started developing cracks in their formal structure, to the extent that it got subdivided into several sects. And all of us are aware of the several sects that came to characterize Buddhism and Jainism. For instance, we know about Shwetambars and Digambars characterizing Jainism. Similarly, the counterpart in Buddhism could be Heenyan and Mahayan. And there are several practices, there are several ways of worshipping which got linked to these new sects. In fact, these new sects actually owe their origin to some kind of difference on account of the modes of worshipping. For instance, in Mahayan, we find that the concept of bodhisattvas and image worship became very important, and therefore the Gandhar art, Mathura art, etc., which flourished around this time, is full of sculptural remains of deities, not only confined to Buddhism, Jainism, but also Brahmanical gods and goddesses. So this is a trend which permeates and which informs other religious pursuits also, although it began with Buddhism, but other religions, contemporary religions and sects were not immune to these changes either. And in fact, the monasteries and stupas which abound around this time received royal patronage, and these were some issues of dispute amongst the various sects of Buddhism and Jainism. And with the emergence of these institutions which characterize the religious landscape around this time, we find that some practices started around this time for which we have direct evidence in the form of inscriptional records and also some information related to the donations by the people for religious beneficiaries and so forth, which give us an idea about the changing modes of worship here. What we find is that in the post-Mauryan times, some of the not so affluent sections of society also, for instance, some petty traders or some artisans or masons or workers, they would also in their individual capacity and owing their affiliation to their occupational status rather than their caste status, had started the practice of donating something or the other. Of course, these donations must not have been very huge given their modest economic background. Nevertheless, the religious practice had transformed in such a way which allowed these sections of society to give away something, however modest it might be, for religious purpose. So there are votive donations which are recorded in inscriptions, and they tell us that it was such modes of worshipping, like say building some wall around a stoop or getting some image inserted into the boundary wall of the stoop, or giving some say incense sticks, or for that matter some puja samagri kind of a thing, like ghee or deepak or something of that sort, which is everyday usage in the religiosity, in the religious practices. They started getting donated by some people who need not necessarily be from some royal lineage or who had some very wealthy background. And what it did probably is that it widened the social base of such religious practices, and therefore the practice of locating an idol or statue in the temple, and that temple becoming sacred and sacred spot, and worshipping actually meant going to that temple and worshipping that central deity or several other deities around the central deity, is something which all of us as Indians today in the contemporary times are so familiar with, the Hindu practice of worshipping. the foundations, it seems, of such practices were laid around this time in the Gupta period, that is post-Mauryan and Gupta period. So this is the time when on the source point of view, it is also interesting to note that this is also the period when most of the Puranas were written. And these Puranas actually, and if we reflect it backwards from the contemporary practices associated with image worship or worshipping particular gods, we find that these practices are less Vedic and more Puranic, because the gods which are worshipped today in Hinduism are actually the gods which had become very prominent and popular around this time. So it's rare to find a temple of Bhagwan Indra today. It's rare to find a temple of say Varun or Agni, who were very important gods, as we discussed in the earlier presentation. So these gods are perhaps losing their importance in the Puranic times, and it is a new set of gods, of course belonging to the same pantheon of gods and goddesses, and not entirely dissociated with the Vedic series of gods and goddesses. So they have some relation. They constitute the single pantheon of gods and goddesses in Brahmanical mode. Nevertheless, they are different entities. It could be incarnation principle getting invoked here, and therefore Ram becomes more important in subsequent times, Shiv, Vishnu, and there are several other gods like Lakshmi, Saraswati, Ganesh, down south Murugan or Kartik. So these are the new gods and goddesses which are becoming prominent in the Puranas, and some kind of association of this phenomena with the changing times around this time in the Gupta and post-Gupta period. Now we are coming to around 6th, 7th century AD period. We find that the mode of worshipping had undergone a major change. So from sacrifice, which was the dominant mode of worshipping in the Vedic and later Vedic period, we get into the Upanishadic period, which is more contemplative, philosophical, or knowledge based, so to say, that one had to meditate, one had to renunciate the world. Asceticism had become important, and this was something which was not only limited to Brahmanical mode of worshipping, but equally shared by the wanderers or ascetics owing allegiance to Buddhism and Jainism and several other heterodox sects. So that we have already discussed, and here the central theme is knowledge based. So from sacrifice to knowledge, and now we are coming in the post Gupta period to a stage where the principle of bhakti or devotion, unqualified devotion, is becoming more and more important. And we will see that alongside these changes that we just talked about in relation to the Puranic gods and goddesses, the sect, the multiplicity of sects that we get to see even in the case of heterodox religions like Buddhism and Jainism. So all this multitude of gods and goddesses are again getting accommodated through the principle of the series of gods and goddesses through incarnations, through the principle of incarnation, etc. So they are getting again brought back into the Brahmanical frame. and that is why we find that Buddha gets his place as one of the avatars of Vishnu, so does Ram, and so forth. And this period, as we talked about in the form of Puranic references, and in the post-Gupta period, we find bhakti replacing knowledge as the mainstream mode of worship. So from sacrifice to knowledge and now to bhakti. Now this bhakti movement, we know that it started down south in the Deccan area, in the southern part of Indian peninsula, and from there on it picked up. Of course, it started with reference to Vaishnavism and Shaivism, and subsequently, by the time it reached North India, it acquired a more popular, and it became somewhat more, we can say, formal also. And the orthodoxy, the element of orthodoxy again came back into it, and that's how the story goes. But important for us to understand here is the actual process at the level of society which ensured the success and transmission of these ideas encapsulated under Bhakti movement. Now, if one were to explore as to what accounted for this change, or what accounted for the success or continuance of this change, we find that the orthodoxy element of Brahmanical belief system and religious practices are something which are getting in a very subtle way challenged by the emergence of Bhakti movement. Bhakti literally means unqualified devotion to God, and this unqualified devotion was articulated through several ways which are very visible and also audible. For instance, repeating the name of the once beloved God time and again, or the principle of communicating with God without involving the intermediaries in the form of the Brahmins or the pujaris, who are the essential component so far, but in bhakti mode of worship, they are rendered not so important in the scheme of things, in the new scheme of things. Also important is the social base of the newfound adherents of Vishnuism and Shaivism. They are by and large people who are not getting very respectable place in the Brahmanical scheme of things, and therefore they adhere to the principles of new forms of worship where Brahmins are not so important in transacting the process of worshipping, and therefore this is something which is important at around this time at the social level. Also, in some regions, and let's understand this as regional articulation, since it was coming, since the social base is not so Brahmanized kind, therefore the usage of Sanskrit is very limited in these articulations, and it is the regional languages which are more understandable and easy ways of communications, they are becoming important. And also this is again understood as something which is very much in tune with the time. So, what we get to see here is that it is the Hinduism which is now transforming itself as per the tunes of the time. The almost similar thing was done by Buddhism and Jainism around 6th century BC, when Brahmanical worship system or religious belief was found orthodox, while these new upcoming social movements were rather unorthodox or heterodox. Now here in the post-Gupta period, it is the changes in bhakti movement which is more in tune with the changing times and is riding on the transformative forces of the period. For instance, regionalism and the depressed classes getting some articulation, getting some religious articulation in the Brahmanical scheme of things. So this is a kind of reinvigorating phase for the continuity of the Brahmanical belief system and the ways of worship which are finding new ways and means to articulate itself. Another tangent of such changes can be seen in the form of what we know today as Tantricism. Now, this was very popular in the early medieval times, particularly in Bengal, Odisha, Bihar area, the eastern part of India. And here again the kind of resistance or opposition to the orthodoxy of Hindu system or Brahmanical mold is something which is becoming very subtly visible. The rituals through which Tantricism articulated its religiosity actually run counter to the established principles and values of Brahmanical system. The 3 M's, Madira, Machli, Mans, Maithun and so forth, they are actually running counter to the predominant Hindu ethos of the period, although they owe their allegiance, overall allegiance to Hinduism itself, to Brahmanical mode itself. So they don't quite dissociate the way Buddhism and Jainism did. They remain within, but the spirit is something that needs to be captured here. And again, the adherents come from the same social base here. So the augurs and people who renunciate the world and acquire kind of religious prestige on account of being the adherent of Tantricism and so forth is something which is again becoming very visible in these parts of India around this time, around the early medieval period. All these changes in effect also meant that quite a few other practices related to worshipping also got changed. Today we are aware of the practice of going out on tirth to several pilgrimage centers spread all across India, and this is a practice which started around this time. So pilgrimage as a practice started in this period on account of the changes that we have spoken of. The individual gods and goddesses which were revered by these communities, by these people, are now finding specific locales where they are supposed to have resided, or some important stories related to their life and times is associated with particular religious centers, which over a period of time come to acquire the form of a tirtha sthal. And in fact, historians have also looked at it from economic functional point of view, and they said that such religious practices helped a great deal in initiating what had almost stopped around this time, the spatial mobility of people. So, as part of this religious practice of going on pilgrimage to different tirth sthals, actually the process of de-urbanization which had set in the early medieval period started showing the green shoots of revival, so to say, because these religious centers, these tirtha sthalas had their own requirements in terms of material necessities and the donations, etc., and people coming to a particular center, residing there for several days and months together, and that's how the economy, the urban economy, so to say, picked up, and mobility started, and it is also argued to have greatly helped the process of revival of urbanism. And from the period of Sultanate or even before that, 11th century, 12th century, and with the arrival of Delhi Sultanate, the Turkish rulers, the slave rulers and so forth, we find again that the third wave of urbanization is witnessed in the Indian subcontinental history. First being Harappa, second being the 6th century BC, the middle of the first millennium BC that we spoke of in so much of details in the earlier interaction, and this is the third wave of urbanization which is becoming visible around this time. Also important is the fact that the issue of granting legitimacy to the monarchs, to the rulers of various regional dynasties, particularly in South India, is something which is witnessed around this time, early medieval times. The great builders, temple builders, be it the Chola kings or the Pallav rulers and several other in Orissa and so forth, are also a product of this very religious ethos and times, and therefore we find that regional iconic gods and goddesses are becoming important, and they receive so much of donations, they receive so much of patronage by the kings, and that accounts for that probably tells us that these gods and goddesses were extremely popular in these areas. And the Bhakti movement, particularly when it came to North India and Central India, and Western India and Eastern part of India, we find that the same spirit of using regional features like regional dialects and languages to articulate their feelings, their ideas, and it was all centered around one master who is again associated with one god, be it Ram, be it Krishna, or several other gods and goddesses. In fact, if we get into the details of Bhakti movement, we also find that it takes another tangent also, and that is the Nirgun variant of Bhakti movement, apart from the Sagun variant, which does talk of the God in one human form. And Nirgun is presence of God. It does not deny the existence of God, but it makes it formless. So there is no requirement for idol worship or temples for situating those gods and goddesses. For instance, Kabir, the kind of contrast that we get to see in Tulsidas and Kabir is something which very nicely brings out the two variants of Bhakti tradition, Sagun and Nirgun. And the regional aspect, as we said, that it could be Sant Gyaneshwar, or it could be several other regional bhakti leaders which are becoming important and prominent around this time. 14th, 15th century, 14th, 15th, 16th century is the period when they are using the local language to write about their favorite gods and goddesses, and in the formless scheme, and also in the case of Kabir, Dadu, and several others in the formless scheme of things. But the economic pertinence and political pertinence is something that we have already spoken about. Now, it is important to understand that these changes that we have been talking of is something which also needs to be looked at, particularly in the context of a new kind of political scenario that India witnessed with the establishment of Delhi Sultanate and subsequently the Mughal rule. The Islamic rulers had their own theological underpinnings, they had their own ways of worshipping, of course, which was different, not only in details but also in ethos to the pre-existing mainstream religiosity in existence in India. But the process of give and take is something which continued in the medieval times, and this is best exhibited through the growth and institutionalization of Sufism in India. Now, Sufism is sort to be understood by scholars in ways which is very diverse, but they do agree that there is an element of some kind of resistance to the orthodox practices, particularly of the early caliphates like Umayyads and so forth in Sufism, and the Sufi saints and their institutions and their approach to a great extent exhibited the same ethos and spirit that Bhakti movement, that the trajectory of Bhakti movement in India displayed. And there are quite a few parallels that can be drawn between Bhakti and Sufism. And that tells us that there is something in the times itself, there is something in the transforming period itself by which be it Bhakti movement or be it growth of Sufism in India are concerned. So both were impacted by the trajectory of change in the religiosity, in the modes of worshipping and so forth. For instance, of course, it is talked about that the egalitarian appeal of Sufism was something which the lower orders of the Indian society took fancy at, and they gravitated towards Islamic principles and tenets as exhibited by Sufism. And at the same time, we find that in Hinduism or within the Brahmanical scheme of things, we have the Bhakti movement doing almost the same to the same section of people. So they are also taking the center stage in the Bhakti movement within Brahmanical scheme of things, and similar kind of thing is exhibited through the growth of Sufism in India as well. Also important is the fact, the other tangent that we talked of with relation to the regional articulations, the Sufi saints and the khankas, as they were called, the hospices of the Sufi saints, they also performed the same function. The religious preachings, the events and ceremonies were all transacted in languages which were more regional rather than official or formal. For instance, Sufi saints tended to use Sindhi or Punjabi more than, say, Persian or Arabic. And that also meant that the appeal was somewhat more democratic, and it is more understandable. A similar thing we have already discussed in the case of Bhakti movement also, that instead of Sanskrit, it is the regional languages that these people, these Bhakti saints are using. All of us know that Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas is in Awadhi and not in Sanskrit, as was the Valmiki's Ramayana. For that matter, Kabir's articulation is also very much seeped into a language which is typical of the area that he belonged to. So Ulatbasi is something that he is so famed for. And so all these things are exhibited also by Sufism. The mystic appeal, the use of several say karishma or sama, that is music, at times they were resented upon by the ulemas who posed as belonging to the formal Islam, so to say, as if the Sufi practices were somewhat aberrations or deviations from the original Islam and so forth. So medieval sources are replete with such instances where there is some kind of a heartburn, there is some kind of a rancor in display by the adherents of Islam in their formal and informal capacities. The lateral spread of Sufism also sensitized to the people at large the actual tenets of Islam, and they somewhat popularized it in their own ways, which was of course at times not always in conformity with the ulema's versions of Islam in India. And that also probably accounts for the popularity of Sufi saints in Indian tradition. All of us are aware of some of the dargahs which continue to be the sites of pilgrimage even today in India. Chishti Darbar, Chishti Dargah, and Nizamuddin Aulia's Dargah and so forth. The Chistis, which represented one variant of Sufism, one of the early variants of Sufism in India. There were Suhrawardis, there were Qadiris, there were Naqshbandis. They came somewhat later, around 16th century. But of course, Chishti, Muinuddin Chishti's Dargah at Ajmer is something which is very famous, even with respect to Akbar, who used to visit that site. Nizamuddin Aulia's Dargah at Delhi is again famed. This is the syncretic and accommodative aspect of the religious practices which characterize the religiosity or the worshipping practices around this time, which gets displayed both through the spread and popularity of bhakti as well as Sufi movements in India. And the appeal is congregational, so people would assemble at one place, and the allegiance is very personal. So that would not require the help of the intermediaries. So formality is dispensed with in favor of subjective liking, subjective love for God, and it is this kind of union which is sought to be the objective of Sufism as well as Bhakti movements. And from this kind of survey, where we looked at the early Vedic practices premised on sacrifices, around the end of the Vedic period and the period of 6th century BC, we find knowledge becoming the chief mode of worshipping, contemplation, meditation becoming chief mode of worshipping. Adi Sankaracharya actually represents the last major figure so far as the knowledge tradition of worshipping is concerned in Hinduism or Brahmanical scheme of things. And that again got somewhat replaced as the chief mode of worshipping with the coming of Bhakti movement, where devotion, personal unqualified devotion becomes the chief mode of worshipping instead of knowledge or sacrifice, as was the case earlier. So there we find Bhakti movement taking over, and different gods and goddesses becoming important, which are truly represented in Puranas also, and new practices like pilgrimage, tirthasthals, temples, temple building, central deities, etc. They become very important as modes of worshipping, and common people getting involved in this, which earlier was a very restricted kind of corridor, social corridor in which such religious practices were transacted. That got opened up, and it is not only Brahmanical frame within which we are talking of. In Buddhism, in Jainism, in Islam also, the same tendencies are to be seen, and therefore it would be better to understand them as truly representative of the period itself to which all these movements and religious practices owe allegiance to. And of course, with the coming of the modernity, modern times, industries becoming important, urban centers becoming important, new ideologies like liberalism, individuality, coming of the British, legal system becoming important, religious codes getting slowly replaced through legal codes, etc. Of course, there is an accentuation on of individuality, and the congregational part of religion gets sidelined, and it becomes again very personalized kind of an affair, and that is how it appears to us in the contemporary times. Of course, sects and small subunits do exist with new, you can say, icons, with new cult figures also becoming important, and we all are in the present times witness to acrimonious religious debates surrounding Sai Baba and the conventional gods and goddesses that we get to see. So, of course, these are the trappings, these are the ways and means through which our religiosity has been getting articulated from the ancient times, across the medieval times, down to the present times. So, by and large, this is the overall picture that we get in a dynamic sense as to how we traveled across time in terms of worshipping, in terms of owing allegiance, in terms of rituals, in terms of offerings, in terms of expanding social base or diminishing social base, in terms of orthodoxy, in terms of reinventing and emerging as reinvigorated religions, in terms of accommodations, and so forth. So I think that takes care of the journey of religious practices and modes of worship so far as Indian history and culture is concerned.
Thank you so much, sir. And with this, I'd like to tell our viewers that we have now had 2 lectures on changing modes of worship in India, and we shall be talking about food culture in our lecture tomorrow with sir. And we would like to thank sir for being here and sparing his valuable time, and also for the students who have been watching us and who have been staying tuned into our regular lectures on art and culture that we have been conducting. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much, sir, for coming today. Thanks a lot.